community fighting for the right to learn.
Who gonna control our education? We gonna let white folks control it or black people?
We wanted to have an institution where there people like us all wanted to be more than the status quo.
A rich cultural legacy.
Black colleges, we're redefining what it meant to be black in America.
It's an unapologetic black space.
A testimony to the power of education.
These professors were on a mission to ensure a vibrant black future.
Filmmakers Stanley Nelson and Marco Williams offer a rare insight into a critical but often overlooked American institution.
These are places where there's incredible freedom to explore.
If you come here, you will find something you won't find anyplace else.
Tell them we are rising. The story of black colleges and universities. Now, only on Independent Lens.
This is the dream, grown young. The dream so bravely tended. Through a century of fears, through the years of working, praying, striving, learning, the dream become a beacon, brightly burning.
Colleges are spaces where black people are affirmed.
You could be yourself and develop yourself in this rich soil.
It's a space that is an unapologetic black space.
These are places where there's incredible freedom to explore.
We wanted to better ourselves. We wanted to have an institution where there people like us all wanted to be more than the status quo.
The question for African Americans has always been, what is education's purpose? Who controls it? And what is the relationship of education to the broader aspirations of our people?
I need more power. I didn't need more power. I need a everlasting power. I need a everlasting power.
On every gate around the stable, as on the plow handles, you can see where I have been trying to write, and every chance that offered would be learning my ABCs. Elijah Moss. There was some niggas that wanted lining so bad, they would study by the light of lightwood torches. But one thing sure, they better not let no white folks find out about it. William McWhirter.
Slavery was more brutal than we can imagine. Brutality went with the system.
But there's another type of brutality that took place during slavery, and that was the brutality of ignorance. Keeping intellectual thought, keeping learning, keeping reading, knowledge from slaves.
The more that a system denies you the chance to read and to write, the more that thing, reading and writing, becomes valuable, becomes precious, becomes a prize that you must have.
I had no schooling whatsoever while I was a slave. On several occasions, I went as far as a schoolhouse door with one of my young mistresses. I had the feeling that getting into that schoolhouse would be the same as getting into paradise. Booker T. Washington.
When they saw white people reading, enslaved people called that talking to books. The idea that this piece of paper that someone was looking at, they could actually communicate with, gave them a sense that this was a kind of knowledge that opened up all kinds of opportunities.
A slaveholder could do virtually anything to his slave. He could work his slave to death. He could rape his slave. He could sell his slave. It's my property, the argument was, so I can do whatever I want to with my property, except one thing I can't do to my property. I can't teach my property. I can't teach my slave how to read or write. An educated Black population could not be an enslaved Black population.
The teaching of slaves to read and write has a tendency to excite dissatisfaction in them. Any person or persons who shall attempt to teach any free person of color or slave.
If a white man or woman be fined no less than $100 or
shall
in
be
prison.
whipped at the discretion of the court, not exceeding 50 lashes.
The revised code of the laws of Virginia.
State of Alabama.
Laws of
Acts
North
and
Carolina.
resolutions of the state of South Carolina.
It didn't just happen in the South. Some abolitionists who wanted to start a college for Black youth in New Haven, where Yale University is located. Yale and the town officials said, no, absolutely not. That's not happening here.
This letter is from the mayor of New Haven, Connecticut, and it says, the location of a college of Blacks here would be totally ruinous to the city, whose certain effect
will be to lower the town's public morals, to drive from our city its female schools, its throngs of summer visitors. The founding of colleges for educating colored people is unwarrantable and dangerous interference with the internal concerns of the southern states and ought to be discouraged.
It's happening all over the country. This discrimination, this repression, this desire to make sure that Black people remain subordinate to whites is something that's national. It's not just Southern at all. And I think that we sometimes forget that.
When I was still quite a child, I could hear the slaves in our quarters whispering that something unusual was about to take place. And it meant their freedom. There was not a single slave on our plantation that could read a line. But in some way, we were kept informed of the progress of the war. Booker T. Washington.
As soon as the war breaks out, African Americans flee the plantation. And once they get behind Union lines, they call them contrabands. The first thing they want to do is to get an education. So in the evening, when they finish their labor, they go to these contraband schools. And as the women say, catch a lesson.
1 by 1, 2 by 2, 3 by 3, and 4 by 4. Take all the members to read them, oh, read them, let me go. Read them, John. Read them, John. Read them, read them, read them, read them, oh, read them, let me go. Read them, John. Read them, John. Read them, John.
I is anxious to learn how to read so I can study and find out about many things. William Adams.
It is wonderful how a people who have been so long crushed to the earth can have so greedy desire for knowledge and such a capability for attaining it. One old woman took her seat among the little ones. She was at least 60 years old. Charlotte Fortin.
They feel that if they can get an education, if they can get knowledge, then other things will follow. This is the beginning of education in the South.
Suddenly, as if at the sound of a trumpet, a whole race that had been slumbering for centuries in barbarism awoke and started off one morning to school.
In the immediate years after the war, one of the first things that formerly enslaved people did was to open schools.
Many of the people who were so-called teachers were really not capable, knowledge-wise, of being teachers. They were simply teaching what they knew. If they knew up to a 6th grade level, then that's what they would teach. And so the first thing that had to be done after the war was to train people to actually teach.
After the Civil War is over, the South is devastated in all kinds of ways. The American Missionary Association recognizes the damage, and they see an opportunity to save the South. And they come down and set up all these schools.
We can now lift them out of the pit. Essential parts of the work can only be done by Northern voluntary Christian organizations. They can bring physical relief. They can establish schools. And they can bear the light of the gospel.
A large majority of them were also dedicated to the idea that the enslaved people needed to be civilized. One person termed it Yankeefied, and they want to create the kind of culture that is essentially a white culture. And the AMA is the main independent organization that sets up first schools and then the colleges that are going to evolve into the historically black colleges.
The African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME, start to say, wait a second, we want to have our own education system in terms that we understand. We have ideas here, black ideas, and so they start forming their own colleges.
They wanted those schools to be as free as possible from paternalism, from racism, whether subtle or blatant.
No man or community of men can elevate another. Elevation must come from within. What the North and the South, however, can do is to seize their injustice and allow the Negro to educate himself. Bishop Benjamin Tanner, AME Church.
The federal government also began creating separate public black and white colleges in the South. By the late 1800s, there were over 86 black colleges. Many of them were created by the AME Church, the AMA, and the federal government.
The South's reaction was one of incredible anxiety. Southern planters elite had an investment in a certain kind of workforce, a workforce that they had been able to keep docile. Education was going to turn that upside down, and the planter elite said that simply can't happen.
In Tuskegee, Alabama, nearly every black school that developed in the county was destroyed or the teachers were run off.
One of the heartbreaking stories is the lynching of a professor at Talladega because he was teaching African-American students. He wrote this very powerful letter to his wife.
My dear wife, I die tonight. It has been determined by those that think I deserve it. God only knows, I have only sought to educate the Negro. God of mercy, bless you and keep you, dear wife and children. Your William.
Between 1866 and 1872, approximately 20,000 people are killed, blacks and whites in the South, all because of this perceived threat that education will unlock something.